Next, from the state capitol, the Senate Executive Committee hears details of a bill designed to reform the state's spending on pensions and eliminate a projected $85 billion in unfunded pension benefits. This runs about 30 minutes.
Eric Madiar, legal counsel to the Senate Democrats, is at the witness table. Mr. Madiar, if you could please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senate Amendments 2 to House Bill 1447 and House Bill 3076, along with Senate Amendment 3 to House Bill 3865, collectively represent the pension benefit changes and other reforms affecting SERS, SURS, TRS, and GARS. Each amendment includes provisions affecting GARS individually, but House Bill 1477 is specific to SERS, House Bill 3076 is specific to SURS, and House Bill 3865 is specific to TRS. Last night I circulated to caucus staff a cleanup technical amendment for each bill that will be filed this morning if it's not been filed already. Each of these technical amendments adds common pension reform provisions that should have been included in each of those amendments that we filed yesterday. So in sum, the three bills that we have here that we're using as vehicles would mirror the legislation that was filed in the House on Senate Bill 1673. Consistent with the Illinois Constitution's pension clause, the legislation seeks to bring greater stability to the state's pension systems, end abuses, lessen the long-term liabilities to the state, and ensure that these systems are fully funded by 2043. The legislation seeks to do this by offering Tier 1 employees and retirees in SERS, SURS, TRS, and GARS adequate and legal consideration to accept a delayed and lower COLA rate on his or her pension. The legislation reflects the input of many stakeholders over several months, including input from labor unions and stakeholders including community colleges, school districts, among others. At this point, I'd like to make a clarification that this legislation does not change retirement age, and it does not increase the contribution rates of Tier 1 employees. Those types of things that have been discussed previously are not in this legislation. At its heart, the legislation really contains four main provisions: the election procedure, the shift of normal cost to school districts, community colleges, and public universities; third, a 30-year funding schedule; and finally, some other reforms to eliminate abuses that have been in the pension system that have received wide public attention. And so these are the points that I'd like to discuss. As far as benefit changes in the election procedure, Tier 1 actives, those that are hired before January 1, 2011, and current retirees in GARS, TRS, SURS, and SERS must make a choice during the election period that would be established under the bill, which would be January 1, 2013 through May 31, 2013. And they have two choices to make. Choice 1, agree to a lower Tier 2 COLA rate, which is 3% simple, or 1/2 of CPI, whichever is less, and have the lower COLA rate kick in the earlier of 5 years after retirement or age 67. That's choice 1. The second choice is they can keep their 3% current compounded cost of living adjustment on their retirement annuity. For Tier 1 actives who make choice 1, that is, they take the lower Tier 2 COLA rate that is delayed, they will receive the following consideration in exchange. 1, a vested right of access to the state retiree health care program. 2, all future salary increases will be offered to count toward the employee's pension. 3, the ability to participate in a new cash balance plan that would be offered. And then with respect to TRS only, we would have a continuation of the early retirement option program. For Tier 1 actives who make choice 2, or as we say, who do not take the deal, they will be able to retain their 3% compounded COLA, but not receive access to the state retiree health care program. Also, future salary increases will not be offered, will only be offered, on the condition that the increases will not count for pension purposes. For example, if a Tier 1 employee's salary is currently $50,000, they make choice 1, and they later receive a $5,000 raise, then the employee's pension will be calculated using the $50,000 salary level and not include the $5,000 raise or any future raises. Note as well that Tier 1 teachers who do not take the deal will not be eligible to participate in the early retirement option. For current retirees making choice 1, that is, they would take the lower COLA rate that's delayed, they will receive a vested right of access to the state retiree health care program. For current retirees making choice 2, again, those who do not take the deal, they will be able to retain, of course, their 3% compounded COLA, but they would not have access to the state retiree health care program. Just with respect to health care, this is what we're referring to. Tier 1 employees or retirees making choice 1 would receive a vested right of access to the program. This guarantees the person and their spouses and dependents access to the state group health insurance program or any successor program, and the ability to receive benefits at whatever level and price determination is put in place. So their benefit levels could float, and the amount they have to pay for those benefits could change as well. Tier 1 employees or retirees who make choice 2, again, those who do not take the deal, cannot participate in the state retiree health care program and must buy their own insurance. Now, I also mentioned that one of the things that is one of the items of consideration that's in the bill is something called a cash balance plan. So I'll describe that briefly. Tier 2 TRS and SURS employees, as part of this legislation to have a Tier 2 fix that we've heard about, may elect to participate in a new cash balance program, and would be required of all new TRS and SURS employees that are hired after June 30th, 2013. And this would be known as a Tier 3. The benefit that we are providing here is also for Tier 1 employees who take the deal in TRS, SURS, and SERS, a cash balance plan. This basically is a savings account where you can put 2% or more of contributions from salary into a fund that would get a guaranteed rate of return of 4 to 10%. And this is something that if you work 5 years, you can take out 40% of the monies that are in that fund and roll it over. And when you do ultimately retire at age, you can annuitize the amount of money that's in it at age 59 and a half. The plan would be to have colleges and universities contribute 4.4% of salary to each cash balance plan for their Tier 2 employees, but Tier 2 employees would contribute 8%. For school districts, they would contribute 3.4% of salary, and Tier 2 teachers would contribute 9%. Now I'd like to turn over to the cost shift. The legislation shifts the employer normal costs now paid by the state for employees participating in TRS and SURS to school districts, community colleges, and public universities on July 1, 2012. The state will pay 100% of the cost in FY 2013. This would allow school districts, community colleges, and public universities 1 year to plan for the phase-in. Starting July 1, 2013, or fiscal year 2014, school districts, community colleges, and public universities will pay 1% of the employer's share of pension based on payroll. The state would pay the rest. Each year, the amount paid by the school districts, community colleges, and public universities will increase by 1% of payroll for the first 5 years. That's between 2014 and 2018, and then 1.2% in fiscal year, in the sixth year, or fiscal year 2019. So once we've had this shift over 6 years up to 6%, The cost shift would then be absorbed by school districts, community colleges, and universities by 0.5% of payroll each year until it's fully absorbed. It's anticipated that this phase-in would take about 6 to 8 years. 1% of payroll represents about $100 million for schools and about $45 million for all community colleges. Now, as far as the unfunded liabilities with this cost shift, the state will pay and be responsible for SURS and TRS's current unfunded liabilities as of June 30, 2012, which is around $61 billion. And we would appropriate that separately. School districts, community colleges, and public universities, however, would be responsible for any growth in the normal cost and any unfunded liabilities that are attributable to their actions. Moving along to the changes that we would have in the bill with pension funding and savings. Beginning in fiscal year 2015, as part of the legislation, we have a trigger in the legislation that says if 50% of employees take the deal for the chosen reforms that we have in the package, then the state would move from its current funding schedule to get to 90% funding to 100% funding within 30 years as a way to wipe out the current $83 billion unfunded liability by 2043. There would be no budget relief as we understand it in fiscal year 2013. In FY 2014, our payment will be reduced about $150 million due to the cost shift with a net projected increase of $350 million over the FY 13 payment. Annual savings are expected to be in the hundreds of over total savings of at least $60 billion over the next 30 years. Per the pension system's actuaries, the benefit changes have the potential to reduce the $309 billion the state would pay to the systems over the next 30 years by between $66 and $88 billion. $88 billion represents the savings if all Tier 1 employees and retirees agree to the reforms or take the deal. $66 billion in savings assumes only a certain categories of folks take the deal. And if no one were to take the deal at all, it's expected that we would have at least some savings close to $66 billion. It's also anticipated that the benefit changes as part of this package would reduce our current unfunded liabilities, which is currently $83 billion, by $11.2 billion. So a reduction for TRS of $5.8 billion, for SURS $2.2 billion, and SERS $3.2 billion. It is our understanding, based on the math that we have available, that the state would save between $27 and $29 billion over the next 30 years with the cost shift of normal cost to school districts, community colleges, and public universities. And it's anticipated that school districts will fully absorb the normal cost shift by fiscal year 2019, and community colleges and universities will do so by fiscal year 2018. One of the features of the legislation is that if there's been a delay in whatever amounts have been appropriated to pay for the pension, to pay the pension payment, and then if the comptroller hasn't made the payment within 90 days after a voucher has been submitted by one of the systems, there would be a private right of action available to the system to compel the payment of that amount that was appropriated by filing a suit in front of the Illinois Supreme Court to demand payment. The last thing is some of the reforms that are part of this bill that have been noted in the press, one of which is we would prohibit persons that are hired by non-governmental entities, such as the Municipal League, Special Olympics, after the bill's effective date from participating in the public pension system. We create a state actuary within the Auditor General's office to have oversight over actuarial assumptions that are made by each system and to review their work. We would prohibit persons hired after the bill's effective date. That would be Tier 3 employees from accruing sick days that could be used for additional years of service credit. And we would be excluding travel vouchers that are filed late from qualifying as compensation for pension purposes after the bill's effective date. With the part of the cost shift, we're also changing the representation on the SURS and TRS boards to give more public employer representation. That's the overview of the bill, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Madiar. Mr. Madiar has just presented the technical aspects of the bill. We have 3 thick stacks of witness slips on each of the 3 bills. There's obviously a fair amount of overlap on those witnesses. I would propose to handle the measures in the following fashion. If any members of the committee have technical questions for Mr. Madiar on the workings of the bill, we'll take those now. We'll then turn to the proponents to testify in favor of the bill, and then we'll make sure we have time to hear from all of the opponents and try to do so in a way that covers the waterfront of the 3 bills.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Schoenberg.
Thank you. I actually wanted to ask you, Mr. Chairman, if it's timely. I have questions about the actuarial assumptions of the bill and the financial implications of this that was not covered in Mr. Madiar's testimony. Would you prefer that I hold off on asking now?
We're going to hear from the Governor's Office and the Office of Management and Budget. I imagine that they would be able to present the actuarial details, and that would be the appropriate time for that question, Senator.
Okay, then the only question I would have for Mr. Madiar is if you could summarize why you believe this contractual dynamic, which I admit is very innovative, will pass constitutional muster.
Thank you, Senator. One of the things that we were dealing with early on was Senate Bill 512 and what was the fundamental flaw with that bill. And that bill basically was promising to do the same thing, which was to have employees pay more to get the same level of benefit that they were entitled to get under the pension code. What we are focusing on this bill is that at its heart, public employees today, unless it's in a collective bargaining agreement or an employment agreement, they are not entitled to get salary increases or demand salary increases. That is up to the public employer. With that right of not requiring public employers to give salary increases, they have it with them also the lesser power to condition how they would offer a salary increase to public employees. So with this bill, we also have other bits of consideration, such as health care access. Health care right now is a statutory program, and as a statutory program, the legislature can change it at any time, and it's not something that has the level of being a constitutional guarantee. What we're doing with this bill for people who take the deal is we're tying the hands of the employer that any time a salary increase is offered in the future, it would have to be offered in the form of always qualifying for pension purposes. We've tied the hands in a legal way, constituting legal consideration, that cannot be used as a point of leverage, that is future salary increases against employees who take the deal. And out of it, they also are able to participate in a cash balance plan, which is a new benefit. And finally, they have guaranteed contractual access to a state retiree health care program. These are things that the state is not obligated to do today, that it would be putting as part of this contractual mechanism. Clearly, setting up a situation where you have a choice for people to make, either you can take it or not take it, we also have to have what I would call some incentive for people to want to take the deal. And that's the aspect of if you do not take it, you do not get health care access, which is something we have the legal right today to preclude people from participating in that state program. And we have the right today as well is to condition how we offer salary increases going forward. And that it's up to the employee if they would want to take a salary increase of, say, $5,000, and we can add a condition that we're going to give you the money, and you could put it in your pocket today. But if you accept it, you're accepting it under the condition that it will not count toward your pension down the road. And the ability to do that is something we have the legal power to do, and that's really at the heart of what we're doing here, is utilizing a contractual mechanism. I hope that fleshes out and answers your question.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Senator Radogno and then Senator Murphy.
Yeah, On that particular point, relative to the pensionable salary, if an employee chooses to not have their future increases be part of their pension, is there still a deduction taken from that increased salary towards the pension?
What would happen is if they were at 50,000 now and they were to say get salary increases that put them up to 75, the deductions for pension purposes would stop at 50,000.
Okay, thanks.
Before I recognize Senator Murphy, CBS 2 and WGN Television both requested permission to videotape the proceedings. Seeing no objection, leave is granted. Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I think it needs to be pointed out from our side of this table that this is a somber occasion. And this is an admission on the part of state government that we're not going to keep a promise that has been made for a long time. And I think that is, it's an unfortunate statement to have to make. I commend you and Senator Brady and Senator Nolan and Representative Sanger and Representative Nekritz on the work group for tackling this problem, because while it is unfortunate that a promise is not being kept, and today we are admitting that, I think it's even worse to continue to lie to people and say that an $83 billion unfunded liability doesn't fundamentally bring into question whether you're going to get what you think you have today. So I commend you on the effort in that regard. And frankly, there's a lot in this proposal that is really sound. I think there are things that labor didn't want that are no longer in here, and I think negotiations took place that have been helpful in making a better product. The committee, again, deserves credit for that. But a little over a year after raising income taxes by $7 billion, the legislative Democrats are proposing a $20.6 billion shift of a state liability onto a property tax liability. Basically saying, we raised your income taxes last year to pay bills just like this one, but now, a little over a year later, we don't really feel like paying it with that money, so we're going to push it off onto your property tax bill. Essentially saying to the taxpayers, we're not going to make you pay this out of your income tax pocket, we're just going to take it out of your property tax pocket. A few years ago, we had an idea around here of a tax swap. We were going to raise the income tax in exchange for property tax relief. Well, now we're getting both. And the question, and the other cost shift with CSRS to the universities. Is there anybody out there who really thinks that's just not going to get pushed off onto the middle class parents that are paying for tuition at increasingly expensive universities? I know the University of Illinois president acknowledged as much yesterday in the House committee. That's another $8 billion onto the middle class. So the direct question that I'll bring to a close, in light of the above, Mr. Stermer, is the governor going to join in with the legislative Democrats in passing $20 billion plus off onto the property taxpayers of the suburbs and downstate and accept this proposal?
Senator Murphy, Mr. Stermer hasn't yet testified. We're taking questions directed to Mr. Madiar on the technical elements of the bill. We're going to hear from the proponents momentarily. I'm sorry, when I recognized you, I thought that you had a technical question for Mr. Madiar.
Will I get the answer eventually?
I would ask you to ask the question again. We're going to have the proponents come and testify. We're dealing with the technical elements of the bill right now.
Okay. I mean, as long as I'm going to get the answer eventually, that's fine.
Senator Ryder, you have a...
Just inquiry of the chair, if I might,
yes.
Mr. Chairman, because we're in a little bit of an unusual position here because we have a staffer testifying on the bill. And I want to make sure we're clear that you'd like the technical questions directed at the staffer and the policy questions may be directed at the actual sponsor of the bill.
I think that the
fair?
sponsor and the proponents can handle the policy questions. Mr. Madiar laid out the technical elements of the bill for us as our legal counsel and expert on these matters, and I think it's appropriate to ask him questions about the technical elements of the bill.
Okay, now, and I want to do this the way you want, but it's just a little unusual because I have both a technical question and a policy question, but I'm not sure when I should go.
Why don't you pose your technical question right now, and if there are policy elements that need to be returned to when other folks are testifying, we can make sure we take that up then.
That'd be great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The right of action, for example, if the appropriation that was necessary for the pension system was $1 million and it was 90 days behind, there would be an ability to have a written demand sent by the system to the comptroller requesting that they make payment within 15 days. And that request would also go to the Secretary of State. And if that payment was not forthcoming within the time allowed, then a lawsuit, a mandamus lawsuit, can be brought by the system before the Illinois Supreme Court to compel payment to come out of the General Revenue Fund.
The right of action is limited to the board, the system board. Is that correct?
That's the way it's drafted, yes.
Okay. And it would be premised on the statutorily mandated contribution as determined by an actuary, correct?
That's correct. We have a mechanism in state law today that has a certified amount that also carries through the continuing appropriate law that exists.
Okay. And I apologize, I'm not sure, I don't remember if you were working for the Senate or the House when this happened, but in fiscal years 6 and 7, there was $2.3 billion that was not paid into the pension systems, but it's my recollection that that was done not by simply not forwarding the voucher, but by changing the law and lowering the payments. If that were to be done again, the right of action wouldn't have no basis, correct? Because then it would be, the General Assembly would be following the law. Is that fair to say?
Senator Ryder, can I just want to clarify that question? Are you referring to the which fiscal year?
I think it was over 2 fiscal years in 2006 and 2007.
Thank you.
Am I incorrect?
There was another $2.3 billion payment from an earlier fiscal year that has surfaced in our conversations from time to time. I just want to make sure we were talking about the correct fiscal year. Thank you.
Okay.
I wasn't in the House at the time, so I wasn't familiar with that. The intent is to have a cause of action triggered on the late payment by the comptroller, whatever the appropriate amount would be.
Whatever the appropriate amount as determined by the actuary based upon state law, correct?
That's correct.
So if a majority of the General Assembly does again, like it did for fiscal years 2006 and 2007, it decides we're not going to pay over whatever period of time what we thought we were going to pay, we just changed it according to the statute, the right of action would have no basis. Is that fair to say?
If we were looking to utilize a mechanism through the continuing appropriation law, we'd have to change that statute. And under our rules that we have in our Senate rules as well as the House, that'd be a 3/5 vote requirement to move that bill from second to third reading.
Excuse me. If you change the funding formula is subject to a majority vote, though, correct?
That would be correct.
So once you change the funding formula, and then the payments, the next payment is based on that.
That's another manner in which to proceed.
Is the right of action any good then? As long as it's paid according to the new formula?
Again, the right of action is premised on the late payment by the comptroller.
And so only late payment.
So if there's a number that's changed by the legislature, that's the legislature changing the number.
Okay. Is there any other provision in the bill with regards to, or the amendments, excuse me, with regards to payment issues? In other words, to bolster the confidence that some might have that the payments according to whatever formula is laid out are actually going to be made?
No.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
President.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.